The scent of 10,000 white lilies hung in the air like a funeral veil as the low hum of Park Hyun-woo's wheelchair echoed across the cathedral's gold-inlaid floor. The sound carried farther than it should have, cutting through the silence of a room filled with Seoul's most powerful figures. This was meant to be the wedding of the century, the union of two childhood legends, the moment the Park Empire secured its future. Instead, the air tasted of tension, sharp and metallic, like blood in the water. At the altar, Se-rin stood in white silk, her veil pushed back, her expression calm and flawless. But her eyes were cold, precise. The eyes of someone who had already decided the ending of this story. 5 days earlier, Hyun-woo had signed over his power of attorney while lying in a hospital bed, trusting the woman he loved to protect everything he had built. Today, she held the microphone like a blade. "I won't marry a cripple." The words fell into the cathedral and seemed to linger there, hanging in the air long after her voice had faded. No one moved. A champagne glass trembled in someone's hand. A camera flash fired and died in the silence. Even the musicians had stopped breathing. Hyun-woo sat perfectly still. His black suit cut a stark line against the white marble and lace, his face carved from stone. Only those closest to him noticed the faint tightening of his jaw, the only sign that anything inside him had shifted. Around the hall, the whispers began, soft at first, then spreading like cracks through ice. Investors leaned toward one another. Rival families watched with quiet, calculating eyes. Phones appeared, messages already being sent. Empires did not always fall with gunfire. Sometimes they collapsed in silence, in a single sentence spoken at the wrong moment. Se-rin removed the diamond ring from her finger and set it on the altar table. The faint clink echoed unnaturally loud. Then she turned and walked away without looking back. The doors closed behind her. And just like that, Park Hyun-woo was alone in a room full of people. Minutes later, the cathedral began to empty, the tide of guests receding, leaving behind only scattered petals and the fading echo of humiliation. Hyun-woo remained where he was, staring at nothing, the weight of betrayal settling over him like ash. Then a shadow fell across the marble. It wasn't a bodyguard. It wasn't a council member. It was a waitress. Amara Cole stood beside him, holding a glass of water, her hand steady, her eyes clear and unafraid. She didn't look at him with pity. She looked at him as if nothing about him had changed. "Drink, chairman," she said softly. Hyun-woo looked up at her for the first time that day. And in that quiet moment, something shifted. Not in the empire, not in the hall, but in him. Amara's voice was calm, certain. "You still have a war to win." Before we continue, I'm curious. Where in the world are you listening from right now? Tell me in the comments your country. I always love seeing just how far these stories travel. And if you enjoy emotional, cinematic stories like this, don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now, let's begin. The heavy oak doors of the grand ballroom had long since clicked shut, sealing away the ghosts of a wedding that had turned into a public execution. Outside those doors, the world was already moving on. In the high-stakes ecosystem of Seoul's underworld, a fallen king was yesterday's news, and the vultures were already squabbling over the remains of the Park Syndicate. But inside the dimly lit corridor of the Grand Seoul Hotel, the silence was a physical weight, thick with the scent of lilies that now smelled less like a celebration and more like a funeral. Park Hyun-woo sat in the center of the hallway, his shadow stretched long and distorted against the marble floor by the dim yellow glow of the overhead sconces. He didn't move. He didn't shout. He didn't even weep. To the casual observer, he looked like a statue, a beautifully carved relic of a man, dressed in a tuxedo that cost more than most people earned in a year, sitting in a chair that represented his new, permanent reality. But beneath the mask of stoicism, Hyun-woo was disintegrating. It wasn't just the paralysis that ate at him. It was the betrayal. Se-rin. They had shared everything since they were children. Scraped knees, secret smiles, and the heavy burden of their family's expectations. He had looked at her 5 days ago from a hospital bed, his body broken and his mind hazy with pain medication, and he had seen a savior. When she had asked him to sign the power of attorney, just to keep things stable, she had said, He hadn't hesitated. He had handed her the keys to his empire because he believed their history was a fortress. He had been wrong. The fortress was made of sand, and Se-rin had been the tide that washed it away. His hands, pale and trembling slightly, gripped the carbon fiber armrests of his wheelchair. He could still hear her voice echoing in the hollow of his skull. "I won't marry a cripple." The word cripple hadn't just been an insult. It had been a verdict. She hadn't just rejected his hand in marriage. She had stripped him of his humanity in front of every rival who had ever feared him. She had shown them he was fragile glass. And in his world, glass was meant to be shattered. A soft, rhythmic sound broke through the silence. The squeak of a rubber sole against polished stone. Hyun-woo didn't turn his head. He didn't care if it was an assassin coming to finish what the accident started, or a rival coming to gloat. He remained staring at a point on the wall where the shadow of a decorative fern looked like a claw. "The guests are gone, sir." The voice was quiet, steady, and lacked the tremor of pity he had grown to loathe over the last week. Hyun-woo's eyes shifted slowly. Standing a few feet away was a young woman. She was wearing the black and white uniform of the hotel's catering staff, a simple apron tied around her waist. Her dark skin glowed softly in the low light, and her hair was styled in neat, elegant twists that seemed to defy the exhaustion that usually slumped the shoulders of service workers at 3 in the morning. She held a tray, but it was empty save for a single condensation-beaded glass of water. "I know," Hyun-woo said, his voice raspy and thin, as if he hadn't used it in years. "Leave me." Amara Cole did not leave. She took a step forward, then another until she was standing within his peripheral vision. She didn't look at the wheelchair with the wide-eyed, uncomfortable curiosity he was used to. She looked at his face. "You haven't moved in 2 hours," she said. It wasn't a judgment. It was an observation. "The air conditioning in this wing is set too low for someone sitting still. You're shivering." Hyun-woo realized then that he was indeed shaking. A fine tremor that started in his chest and radiated outward. He hated that she had noticed. He hated that a waitress, a stranger, a nobody, was the only person left in this building who wasn't currently on the phone trying to sell his territory to the highest bidder. "I told you to leave," he snapped, his eyes flashing with a spark of the old fire that had made men tremble. "Do you know who I am? I could have you fired for even looking at me." Amara didn't flinch. If anything, a ghost of a smile touched her lips. Not a smile of mockery, but one of recognition. "You could," she agreed. "But then you'd have to find someone else to bring you this water. And the rest of the staff is currently in the kitchen gossiping about which rival family is going to take over your shipping ports by Monday morning." The bluntness of her words was like a slap of cold water. Hyun-woo finally turned his chair to face her fully. He looked at her. Really looked at her. She wasn't Korean. She was an outsider, much like he felt like an outsider in his own body. "Why are you still here?" he asked, his voice losing its edge, replaced by a weary curiosity. "I was born in a village where we don't leave wounded lions to the hyenas," Amara said, stepping closer and offering the glass. "Even if the lion is being stubborn." Hyun-woo reached out, his fingers brushing hers as he took the glass. The contact was brief, but it felt electric in the dead air of the hallway. He drank the water in long, desperate gulps, realizing only now how parched he was. When he finished, he set the glass on his lap, staring at the melting ice. "They think I'm finished," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "Se-rin. She didn't just take my pride. She took the legal authority. The power of attorney I signed gives her the right to liquidate my shares. By the time I can get a court date to challenge it, there will be nothing left of the Park Syndicate but a memory." Amara leaned against the cold marble wall, crossing her arms. She didn't offer empty platitudes. She didn't tell him everything would be okay. Instead, she asked, "Is there a loophole?" Hyun-woo gave a bitter, short laugh. "My grandfather was a paranoid man. He built the syndicate on the idea of blood and legacy. In the bylaws of the family trust, there is a stability clause. It states that if the chairman is incapacitated, his power of attorney is absolute, unless he is married. A legal spouse has the right to an immediate injunction of marital interest, which freezes all asset transfers for 1 year to ensure the estate isn't drained. It was designed to keep gold-digging mistresses from robbing the family if the patriarch fell ill. He looked up at her, his eyes dark with a sudden, desperate realization. But I'm not married. Se-rin made sure of that tonight. She timed her rejection perfectly. The moment she walked out that door, she became the sole legal executor of my life. Amara stayed silent for a long moment, her gaze sweeping over the opulent hallway, the gold leaf, and the man who owned it all but possessed nothing. She saw the way his knuckles were white where he gripped the glass. She saw a man who had been discarded by everyone he had ever protected. A year, she mused. 1 year of frozen assets. Is that enough time for you to fight back? In a year, I could dismantle her entire life, Hyun-woo said, his voice vibrating with a sudden, lethal intensity. In a year, I could find the evidence that the accident wasn't an accident. I could buy back the loyalty of my captains. I could stand again. Maybe not on my feet, but on my own terms. Then marry someone else, Amara said simply. Hyun-woo looked at her as if she had suggested he fly to the moon. Who? Every woman in that room tonight saw me as a liability. The families who would have crawled through broken glass to marry me yesterday are currently deleting my number. In the eyes of the elite, I am a broken man. Amara straightened up, moving away from the wall. She walked around him, her footsteps light, circling him like she was inspecting a building's foundation. You're looking in the wrong places, she said. The elite are sharks. They only swim toward the scent of blood. You don't need a shark. You need a weapon. Someone who doesn't exist in their world. Someone they won't see coming. Hyun-woo's heart began to hammer against his ribs. A frantic, rhythmic thumping he hadn't felt since before the crash. He looked at the waitress. She was an architecture student. He remembered seeing her name on a staff list once. Amara Cole. She was here on a visa, working 3 jobs to send money home, navigating a world that looked down on her with the same suffocating pity they now gave him. You, he breathed. The word was a question and a revelation all at once. Amara stopped in front of him. I'm a stranger. I have no family ties to your rivals. I have no shares to sell. I am invisible to people like Se-rin. And because I am invisible, I see everything. Hyun-woo reached out, his hand trembling, and took her wrist. His grip was firm, a ghost of the power he used to wield. Do you have any idea what you're saying? This isn't a fairy tale. My world is made of shadows and blood. If you marry me, you become a target. Se-rin will try to destroy you. My rivals will try to use you. You would be entering a cage. I'm already in a cage, Chairman, Amara replied, her voice dropping to a low, resonant tone. A cage of poverty, of being a nobody, in a city that refuses to learn my name. You're offering me a throne. Even if that throne is in the middle of a battlefield, it's better than the floor. The logic was cold. It was practical. It was exactly the kind of thinking that had built the Park Empire. Hyun-woo felt a strange, jarring respect for this woman. She wasn't looking at him with sympathy. She was looking at him as a partner. A contract, Hyun-woo said, his mind already spinning with legalities. 1 year. I will pay you $10 million. I will provide you with a legal team, a security detail, and a life of luxury you cannot imagine. In exchange, you give me your name. You become the shield that freezes my assets. You become my eyes in the rooms I can no longer enter. Amara looked down at his hand on her wrist, then back at his face. The grief that had occupied his features only minutes ago was being pushed aside by a cold, calculating brilliance. This was the man Se-rin thought she had broken. I don't want $10 million, Amara said. Hyun-woo frowned. What do you want? I want the architecture of your empire, she said. I want to see how it works. I want to be your ultimate weapon, not just a placeholder. I want you to treat me as an equal, not a servant. And I want you to promise me that when we win, Se-rin loses everything. Not just the money. I want her to feel exactly what you felt when that microphone turned on. A slow, dark smile spread across Hyun-woo's face. It was the first time he had smiled since the brakes had failed on that mountain road. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a king who had just found his sword. "You're a dangerous woman, Amara Cole." "I've had to be," she whispered. "The world isn't kind to people like us. We have to be the ones who bite back." Hyun-woo pulled her slightly closer. The scent of the lilies was still there, but now it was overwhelmed by the scent of ozone, the smell of a coming storm. "There is a judge who owes my family a favor," Hyun-woo said, his voice now a low, commanding rumble. "He lives 20 minutes from here. He has a private seal. If we go now, we can have the marriage certificate backdated to 10 p.m. 2 hours before Se-rin filed her power of attorney at the midnight registry. By the time the sun rises, she won't be the executor of my estate. She'll be a trespasser." Amara nodded. She didn't hesitate. She didn't ask for time to think. She reached out and took the empty glass from his lap, setting it on her tray, which she placed on a nearby chair. She was shedding her old life as easily as she set down that tray. "Then let's go," she said. She stepped behind his wheelchair, her hands gripping the handles. For a moment, Hyun-woo felt a prick of the old shame, the idea of being pushed, of being dependent. But as Amara's hands settled firmly on the grips, he felt something else, a sense of alignment. "Amara," he said, looking straight ahead at the closed doors of the ballroom. "Yes, Chairman?" "Don't call me Chairman. In front of the world, we are a couple who has been secretly in love for months. A man who found his true soulmate while his fiancée was busy counting his money." He paused, his voice softening just a fraction. "And Amara, thank you." "For what?" "For seeing a man where everyone else saw a ruin." Amara leaned down, her breath warm against his ear, her voice a promise of the vengeance to come. "They didn't see the ruin, Hyun-woo. They saw the fire. They were just too afraid to realize it was still burning. Now, let's go give them a reason to be afraid." She pushed the chair forward. The wheels hummed against the marble, no longer a sound of defeat, but the first low roll of thunder. They moved through the corridor, past the discarded wedding programs and the wilting flowers, two strangers bound by a contract of survival and a shared thirst for justice. As they reached the elevators, Hyun-woo reached back, his hand finding hers on the handle. He squeezed it, a silent pact. The Park Empire was bleeding, and the sharks were indeed circling. But as the elevator doors slid shut, hiding them from the prying eyes of the hotel, the sharks had no idea that a new predator had just entered the water. And this one didn't need to stand to tear them apart. The war had begun, and for the first time in 5 days, Park Hyun-woo knew he was going to win. Not because he had his legs, but because he had found something far more dangerous. A woman who gave him a reason to fight. The rain began to lash against the windows of the sleek black sedan as it cut through the neon-soaked streets of Seoul, the wipers struggling to keep pace with the sudden deluge. Inside the car, the silence was thick, but it was no longer the heavy, suffocating silence of the wedding hall. It was a silence of calculation. Park Hyun-woo sat in the back seat, his gaze fixed on the passing blur of city lights, while Amara sat beside him, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She was no longer wearing the waitress's apron. She had shed it in the hotel locker room, revealing a simple, dark dress that made her look less like a servant and more like a shadow ready to merge with the night. Hyun-woo reached into the pocket of his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a slim, encrypted smartphone. His fingers moved with a ghost of their former speed, tapping out a message to a man who had been a ghost in his father's Rolodex for decades. "We're going to see Min-ho," Hyun-woo said, his voice dropping into a low, gravelly register that seemed to vibrate in the confined space of the car. "He's the only lawyer in this city who doesn't answer to the board of directors or the families. He answers only to the bloodline." Amara turned her head slightly, her dark eyes catching the reflection of a passing red light. "The power of attorney," she began, her voice steady. "You said a marriage triggers a clause. Why didn't Se-rin know about it? She grew up with you. She knows your family's secrets." Hyun-woo leaned his head back against the leather headrest, a ghost of a bitter smile playing on his lips. "She knows the secrets I chose to share. But my grandfather, Park Dae-sung, was a man who lived through 3 wars and 5 coups. He didn't believe in love, and he certainly didn't believe in the permanence of a woman's loyalty. He saw a wife as a tool of the state, a necessary alliance. But he also knew that a man's enemies would always try to use his heart against him. He wrote a blood and bone clause into the family trust. It was never meant to be public. It was his final failsafe. He shifted his weight, a wince of pain crossing his face that he tried and failed to hide. The clause states that while a power of attorney can be granted to a fiancé or a business partner during a time of crisis, the moment a legal spouse enters the picture, all previous external legal mandates are suspended for a cooling-off period of 365 days. It was designed to prevent a mistress or a rival from seizing the throne if the chairman was incapacitated. My grandfather believed that a wife's legal interest in the estate would always be a stronger shield than a lawyer's promise. And because we were never married, Amara finished the thought, Se-rin was able to bypass that shield. She thought by rejecting you at the altar, she was ensuring you remained unprotected, so her power of attorney would remain the supreme legal document. Exactly, Hyun-woo said. She was so focused on the humiliation, so focused on making sure no one else would want me, that she forgot the most basic rule of the Park family. We always have a trap door. She thinks she's already won. She's probably at some penthouse right now, popping champagne with the Lee family, celebrating the fact that she has the authority to sell my shipping ports by Monday morning. She has no idea that the moment your name hits a marriage certificate, her authority turns into a pumpkin. The car slowed as it turned into a narrow, cobblestone alleyway in the Jongno district, far from the gleaming skyscrapers of Gangnam. They stopped in front of a nondescript, 3-story brick building with no sign on the door. The driver, a silent man who had served Hyun-woo's father for years, stepped out and deployed a ramp. He didn't ask questions. He simply helped Hyun-woo into the chair and walked them to the door. The interior of the building smelled of old paper, expensive tobacco, and the cold, metallic scent of a safe. An ancient elevator took them to the top floor, where the doors opened into a room that felt like it belonged in the 19th century. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves groaned under the weight of leather-bound volumes, and a single green-shaded lamp glowed on a massive mahogany desk. Behind the desk sat a man who looked like he was made of parchment and iron. Min-ho didn't stand. He simply looked at Hyun-woo's wheelchair with a clinical detachment that Hyun-woo actually found refreshing. "You're late for your wedding, Hyun-woo," the old man said, his voice like dry leaves skittering across the sidewalk. "The wedding was a theater production, Min-ho. This is the reality," Hyun-woo replied, gesturing to Amara. "This is Amara Cole. I need the papers drawn up. Backdated to 10 p.m. tonight. Use the emergency private registry seal. I need the spousal injunction ready to be filed at the central courts by 6 a.m. Min-ho's eyes shifted to Amara, sharp and piercing as a hawk's. He looked at her simple dress, her steady hands, and the way she didn't shrink under his gaze. "A waitress, I presume?" the lawyer asked. "A partner," Amara corrected him, her voice ringing out in the quiet room. The old lawyer let out a short, dry chuckle. "Dae-sung would have liked you. He always preferred the ones who had nothing to lose. They're the only ones who can't be bought." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a heavy, cream-colored document. "I've already pulled the trust records. The blood and bone clause is still active. But you understand the risk, girl? Once you sign this, you aren't just his wife. You are the legal target for every bullet meant for him. If he dies before the year is up, Se-rin will come for you with everything the law and the street allows." Amara walked forward, her shadow lengthening across the desk until it touched the lawyer's hands. "I've spent my whole life being a target for people who think they're better than me just because they have a different passport or a bigger bank account. At least this time, I'll be standing on a throne when they shoot." Hyun-woo felt a surge of something that wasn't quite love, but was far more potent. A profound, mutual recognition. He reached out, taking a heavy fountain pen from the desk. "The contract is simple," he said to Amara, his eyes locked on hers. 1 year. No physical obligations. You live in the mansion, you have total access to my security, and you have a seat at every table I sit at. In exchange, you are my legal shield. We will play the part of the devoted couple in public to justify the suddenness of the union. We tell the world we've been seeing each other in secret for months, that I was only marrying Se-rin for the family alliance, but my heart belonged to you. A beautiful lie, Amara whispered. The best lies are the ones people want to believe, Hyun-woo said. And the public loves a story about a man who finds true love after being abandoned in his darkest hour. He signed his name first. The ink was dark and thick, the signature a jagged, aggressive mark on the page. Then he pushed the paper toward Amara. The room seemed to hold its breath as she took the pen. For Amara, this wasn't just a signature. It was a severance from every limitation she had ever known. She thought of the long shifts, the tired feet, the way she had to smile at people who treated her like furniture. She thought of the sharks in the wedding hall and the way they had looked at Hyun-woo. She realized that she wasn't just saving him. She was becoming the very thing the city of Seoul feared most, an unknown variable. She signed her name with a steady, flowing script. The clink of the lawyer's heavy brass seal against the paper echoed like a gunshot. Asterisk thump. 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 Asterisk 3 copies. One for the trust, one for the court, and one for the war to come. It is done, Min-ho said, folding the papers into a waterproof leather folder. As of 10 p.m. tonight, Park Hyun-woo and Amara Cole are legally wed under the laws of the Republic and the mandates of the Park Syndicate. Se-rin's power of attorney is now a dead letter. The moment she tries to move a single one out of the central accounts tomorrow morning, the system will lock her out. Hyun-woo took the folder, his hands tightening around it. He felt a sudden, sharp clarity. The weight of the humiliation at the altar was still there, a cold stone in his gut, but it was being wrapped in the heat of a new purpose. He looked at Amara, who was staring at the gold band Hyun-woo had pulled from his pocket, a backup ring he had kept in his jacket, ironically meant for Se-rin. Take it, Hyun-woo said, holding the ring out to Amara. It needs to be on your finger before we walk out of this building. There will be paparazzi or rival spies watching the mansion. They need to see the gold. Amara took the ring. It was heavy, a thick band of platinum with a single, flawless black diamond. She slid it onto her finger, and for a moment, the coldness of the metal made her shiver. It's heavy, she remarked. That's the weight of the empire, Hyun-woo replied. Get used to it. Tomorrow morning you aren't the girl who offered me water. You are the woman who stole the king of Seoul from the woman who thought she'd killed him. They descended the elevator in silence, the air between them charged with the electricity of their new alliance. When they reached the lobby, Hyun-woo stopped his chair, looking up at her. The neon lights from the alleyway cast blue and purple streaks across her face. Amara, he said, his voice softer now. I won't lie to you. The next 48 hours will be a bloodbath. Se-rin is a childhood friend, but she is also a sociopath. When she realizes she's lost her grip on the money, she will stop using lawyers and start using men with silenced pistols. Are you sure you're ready for this? Amara leaned down, her face inches from his. She didn't look like a waitress. She looked like the architect of a nightmare. I spent my childhood navigating streets where you had to be faster than a bullet just to get to school. Hyun-woo. Se-rin grew up in silk and marble. She thinks she's a predator because she's never met a real one. Let her come. Hyun-woo felt a thrill of genuine admiration. He reached out, his hand covering hers on the armrest of the chair. Then let's give her the surprise of her life. As they emerged from the building, the rain had turned into a light mist. The driver opened the door, and as Hyun-woo was loaded back into the car, he looked at the dark windows of the surrounding buildings. He knew the eyes were there. He knew the whispers were already traveling. By dawn, the story would break. Chairman Park marries mysterious stranger in midnight ceremony. The ride back to the Park mansion felt different. The car was no longer a retreat. It was a command center. Hyun-woo opened his laptop, the screen illuminating his face in a harsh white light. He began to look at the list of his captains, the men who controlled the ports, the construction sites, and the digital laundries. He knew which ones were leaning towards Se-rin. He knew which ones were waiting to see if he would die or disappear. Look at this, he said, turning the screen toward Amara. He pointed to a name, Captain Cho. He controls the Incheon docks. He was Se-rin's father's protege. He's the one who will try to move the first shipment of untracked goods the moment he thinks the coast is clear. Amara looked at the data, her eyes scanning the logistics with a speed that surprised him. He's using a shell company registered in Panama, she noted, pointing to a string of numbers. But the port fees are being routed through a local bank in Singapore. If we freeze that specific routing number, his ships won't be able to clear the harbor. He'll be stuck with millions in perishable cargo. Hyun-woo stared at her. How do you know that? I told you, she said, a small, knowing smile on her lips. I'm an architecture student, but my minor was in forensic accounting. I wanted to know how the big buildings got built, and whose blood was in the mortar. You'd be surprised how much you can learn about a man's empire just by looking at his tax returns and blueprints. Hyun-woo felt a laugh bubbling up in his chest. A real, genuine laugh. Se-rin thought she was replacing me with a puppet. Instead, she's handed the keys to a grandmaster. They reached the gates of the Park mansion, a sprawling estate of glass and stone that looked like a fortress perched on the hills of Seoul. The guards at the gate, usually stoic and unmoving, visibly double-taked when they saw the woman sitting in the back of the car with the chairman. They didn't see a waitress. They saw a woman with a platinum ring on her finger and a gaze that didn't flinch. The car pulled up to the main entrance, and as the doors were opened, the head of the household staff, a woman who had been with the Park family for 40 years, stood waiting. Her face was a mask of confusion and concern. Chairman, she began. The news? We heard rumors. Miss Se-rin's people were here an hour ago, trying to change the security codes. Hyun-woo didn't even look at her. He looked at Amara as she stepped out of the car and walked around to his side. Mrs. Park will handle the security codes, Hyun-woo said, his voice ringing out across the foyer. She is the sole legal mistress of this house. Anyone who has an issue with that can leave their badge on the table and be out by sunrise. The silence that followed was absolute. Amara stepped into the house, her heels clicking against the marble floor. The same sound Se-rin's heels had made when she walked out of the wedding. But this time it didn't sound like a countdown. It sounded like an arrival. She turned to the head of the staff, her expression calm and regal. Get the chairman to his study, Amara commanded, and bring me the internal server logs for the last 5 days. I want to see exactly who Miss Se-rin has been talking to from inside these walls. The staff member bowed, a deep, respectful bow that acknowledged the shift in the universe. Yes, madam. Hyun-woo watched Amara take command of the room, and for the first time since the accident, the phantom pains in his legs didn't feel like a reminder of what he had lost. They felt like a reminder of what he was about to reclaim. He was in a wheelchair, his childhood love was his greatest enemy, and his empire was under siege. But as he looked at Amara Cole, the woman who had offered him water in his darkest hour and a sword in his most desperate, he knew that Se-rin had made a fatal mistake. She had thought he was broken because he couldn't stand. She was about to find out that a king is most dangerous when he finally has nothing left to lose but the woman standing behind him. Amara, he called out as she began to walk toward the stairs. She paused, looking back at him. Yes, Hyun-woo. Welcome to the Empire. She didn't smile. She simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the war they had just declared. Let's go to work, husband. As the elevator took him up to his study, Hyun-woo looked at the wedding ring on his own finger, the match to hers. It was a contract, yes. It was a business arrangement. But as he felt the cool metal against his skin, he realized that for the first time in his life, he wasn't alone in the dark. The contract was signed, the ink was dry, and the hunt was about to begin. Se-rin had wanted a broken man. By the time the sun rose, she was going to find out that she had created a god of vengeance, and he had just found his high priestess. The Park Syndicate was no longer just a family business. It was a fortress. And with Amara Cole at the helm, the walls were finally closing in on the woman who thought she'd won. The night was far from over, but the ending was already written. Se-rin had said she wouldn't marry a cripple. Hyun-woo looked at his hands, steady and strong. He didn't need his legs to pull the strings that would hang her. He just needed the woman who was currently rewriting the security protocols of his life. The war wasn't coming. It was here. And for the first time, the king was ready. The black sedan glided through the iron-wrought gates of the Park estate, its headlights cutting twin paths through the thick, swirling mist that clung to the hillside. This was the fortress of the Park dynasty, a sprawling sanctuary of glass, dark granite, and ancient pine trees that had stood for generations. In the back seat, Amara looked out at the limestone walls, realizing that she was no longer entering this house as a temporary fixture or a ghost in the hallway. She was entering as its mistress. Beside her, Hyun-woo sat in a silence that was no longer brittle, but weighted with the gravity of the war they had just formalized. His hand remained over hers on the armrest, a tether between two people who, until 4 hours ago, had been total strangers. When the car came to a stop beneath the sweeping porte-cochere, the heavy front doors of the mansion swung open, casting a long rectangular beam of warm light across the wet pavement. A phalanx of household staff and security guards stood assembled in the foyer, their expressions ranging from sheer exhaustion to bewildered curiosity. They had all heard the rumors vibrating through the encrypted channels of the syndicate. They knew the wedding had ended in a disaster that should have buried their chairman. They did not expect him to return with a queen. The driver deployed the ramp with a mechanical hum that seemed to echo too loudly in the pre-dawn quiet. As Hyun-woo rolled out of the car, his posture was as straight as the chair allowed, his jaw set in a line of granite. Amara stepped out after him, her presence immediately drawing every eye in the room. She was still in her dark, simple dress, her hair in the same twists she had worn while serving champagne, but the way she carried herself had shifted. The exhaustion of her double shifts had been replaced by a focused, regal intensity. The black diamond on her finger caught the light, flashing like a dark warning. A collective gasp, soft but unmistakable, rippled through the staff as they recognized her. She was the girl from the catering team, the girl who had been seen clearing plates only hours before. The head of security, a man named Captain Kong whose face was a map of scars and old loyalties, stepped forward, his hand twitching near his holster. "Chairman," Kong began, his voice tight with confusion. "We received a notice from Miss Se-rin's legal team. They said the security protocols were being transferred to her name under the power of attorney. They told us to prepare for your relocation to the medical wing." Hyun-woo didn't even look at the man. He looked straight ahead into the heart of his home. "Miss Se-rin's legal team is operating on outdated information, Kong. As of 10 p.m. tonight, the power of attorney has been suspended by the blood and bone clause of the family trust." He paused, his voice dropping into a cold, resonant baritone that filled the foyer. "I would like to introduce you to the new mistress of this house. My wife, Amara Cole Park. Her word is now my word. Her safety is the syndicate's primary directive. If any of you find that difficult to process, you may leave your resignations on the hall table and depart before the sun rises." The silence that followed was heavy enough to suffocate. The head housekeeper, Mrs. O, stared at Amara with a look of pure shock. In the hierarchy of Seoul's elite, the jump from waitress to Mafia queen was a leap that defied the laws of social physics. But as Amara stepped forward, standing slightly behind Hyun-woo's shoulder, she didn't wait for their approval. "Captain Kong," Amara said, her voice clear and commanding, cutting through the stagnant air. "The perimeter sensors on the North Ridge are lagging by 3 seconds. I noticed it on the monitor in the car. Have your tech team recalibrate the delay and update the biometric encryption on the main elevator. Use a dual key system, my thumbprint and the chairman's, and fire the 2 guards who were whispering at the gate. If they can't maintain discipline when the chairman returns, they won't maintain it when the house is under fire." Kong blinked, stunned by the technical precision of her orders. He looked at Hyun-woo, looking for a sign that this was some sort of trauma-induced delusion. Hyun-woo simply raised a brow. "You heard the lady of the house, Captain. Move." The staff scattered like dry leaves in a sudden wind, their whispers hushed by the sheer force of Amara's arrival. As she began to push Hyun-woo toward the private elevator, Mrs. O stepped forward tentatively. "Madam, shall I prepare the guest wing for your things?" Amara didn't stop. "No, Mrs. O. I will be staying in the master suite with my husband, and I want the lilies removed from every room in this house. Replace them with something that doesn't smell like a funeral. Dark roses, perhaps, or nothing at all." They had just reached the master suite when the sound of screeching tires tore through the quiet of the estate. A moment later, The front doors of the mansion were slammed open with such violence that the sound reached the upper floors. Amara felt Hyun-woo's shoulders stiffen beneath his suit. He didn't have to check the cameras to know who it was. The sharks had realized the water was freezing. "Stay here," Hyun-woo whispered, his hand finding Amara's. "No," Amara replied, her grip firm on the handles of his chair. "We do this together." That was the contract. They descended the elevator just as Se-rin stormed into the foyer. She was still in her white wedding dress, though the silk was now stained with rain and the hem was torn. She looked like a ghost that had refused to stay buried, her face twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Behind her stood two lawyers in expensive gray suits, clutching leather briefcases like shields. "What is the meaning of this?" Se-rin screamed, her voice cracking the polished silence of the hall. "I just got a notification from the bank. The accounts are frozen. My power of attorney has been flagged for review." "Hyun-woo, you pathetic cripple, what have you done?" She stopped abruptly as the elevator doors slid open. Her eyes landed first on Hyun-woo, then traveled upward to Amara. The sight of the waitress standing in the heart of the Park stronghold, her hand resting protectively on Hyun-woo's shoulder, caused Se-rin to lose her breath. "You," Se-rin hissed, her fingers shaking as she pointed at Amara. "You're the help, the little rat who was serving water. What are you doing in this house? Guards, throw this trash out into the rain where she belongs." Not a single guard moved. Captain Kong stood like a statue near the door, his eyes fixed on a point in the distance. The shift in loyalty was already complete. They were men who understood power, and they could see that Se-rin was losing hers. Amara pushed the chair forward, stopping only a few feet from the woman who had tried to dismantle Hyun-woo's life. "The trash has a name, Se-rin," Amara said, her voice terrifyingly calm. "And currently that name is Park. You're standing in my foyer, screaming like a common street brawler. It's quite a fall from grace for a childhood legend, don't you think?" Se-rin's laughter was a jagged, ugly sound. "A name? You think a piece of paper makes you one of us? You're a temporary distraction, a desperate move by a broken man who is terrified of the dark. Hyun-woo, did you really think marrying a servant would save you? I have your shares. I have the board. This house is mine by the end of the week." "Actually," Hyun-woo intervened, his voice a low, lethal hum. "The blood and bone clause, which your father was so fond of mentioning during the early days of our engagement, begs to differ. The moment I married Amara, your power of attorney became a legal relic. You have no authority to sell shares, you have no authority to access the syndicate's funds, and you certainly have no authority to be in this house." One of Se-rin's lawyers stepped forward, clearing his throat nervously. "Chairman, if I may, a marriage under these circumstances, with a person of this background, can be easily contested as a fraudulent union intended to bypass legal mandates. We will have this annulled by noon." Amara turned her gaze to the lawyer. It was the look of a predator who had spent her life studying the weak points of structures. "On what grounds, counselor?" "We have a backdated certificate signed by a judge with a private seal. We have a history of secret meetings, which the hotel's security footage will conveniently confirm once I've finished editing the logs. And most importantly, we have a chairman who is perfectly lucid and has made a choice. Are you prepared to argue in open court that a man is mentally incompetent just because he chose a woman with a brain instead of a woman with a knife in her sleeve?" The lawyer stammered, his eyes darting to the floor. Amara stepped around the wheelchair, walking slowly towards Se-rin. The contrast was striking. The villain in her tattered white lace, a symbol of a dead past, and the stranger in her dark, simple dress, a symbol of a cold future. "You made a mistake, Se-rin," Amara whispered, leaning in so only the other woman could hear. "You thought his legs were his only strength. You thought that by humiliating him you could steal his legacy. But all you did was clear the space for someone like me to walk in. You're not a queen. You're just a girl who forgot that in this world, loyalty isn't bought with a ring. It's forged in the fire you just started." Se-rin's hand flew up, a desperate, instinctive move to strike Amara's face, but Amara caught her wrist mid-air. Her grip was like a vice, honed by years of manual labor and a lifetime of defending herself. She didn't flinch. She simply squeezed until Se-rin gasped in pain. "Don't," Amara warned, her voice dropping to a dangerous level. "I am the mistress of the Park Empire now. If you touch me, my security detail won't just throw you out. They'll ensure you never find your way back to your father's house." "Is that the reality you wanted to talk about at the wedding?" Amara let go of her wrist, and Se-rin stumbled back, her chest heaving. She looked at Hyun-woo, looking for a shred of the boy she had grown up with, but she found only a stranger with eyes like winter. "You'll regret this," Se-rin spat, though the bravado was leaking out of her voice. "Both of you. The Lee family won't accept this. The board won't accept a foreigner as the face of the Park Syndicate. You've just signed your own death warrants. The Lee family only accepts winners, Se-rin," Hyun-woo said. "And right now you look like a very loud loser. Captain Kong, escort these people to the gate. If Miss Se-rin or her legal team attempts to step foot on this property again, without a court-ordered subpoena, use whatever force is necessary to remove them." "Hyun-woo!" Se-rin shrieked as Kong stepped forward, his massive frame looming over her. "You can't do this. We grew up together. Our families are dead." Se-rin. Hyun-woo cut her off. "And you killed whatever was left of our history at that altar. This isn't personal anymore. It's business. And as you said yourself, business is reality." Kong placed a heavy hand on Se-rin's shoulder. She tried to shake him off, but the guards closed in, a silent wall of black suits that signaled the end of her reign. She was led out of the mansion, her screams echoing down the driveway until they were swallowed by the rain. When the doors finally closed, the silence that returned was different. It was the silence of a house that had been purged. Amara stood in the center of the foyer, her chest rising and falling slowly. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the cold reality of the path they had chosen. She looked down at her hands. They were shaking, just a little. Hyun-woo rolled his chair toward her. He reached up, taking her hand and pulling it gently toward him. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at the black diamond on her finger, the symbol of their war pact. "You held your ground," he said softly. "Most people would have broken under her voice alone. She has a way of making you feel small." Amara looked down at him, a weary smile touching her lips. "I've been small my whole life, Hyun-woo. I've been the person people look through. Se-rin doesn't realize that when you're invisible, you learn how to see the cracks in everything. She's all cracks." Hyun-woo squeezed her hand. "She won't stop. She'll go to the rivals now. She'll try to provoke a civil war within the syndicate captains. She'll tell them I'm weak and that you're a puppet. The next few weeks will be a siege. Then we'll make this mansion a fortress," Amara replied. "I want the internal server logs tonight. I want to know which of your captains have been receiving payments from her father's shell companies. And I want to see the blueprints for the Incheon docks again. If we can't walk, we'll make sure no one else can move a single shipment without our permission." Hyun-woo felt a surge of genuine, fierce pride. He had expected a partner. He had found a general. He realized then that Se-rin's greatest mistake wasn't the rejection or the theft. It was assuming that a man in a wheelchair was a man alone. "Mrs. O," Hyun-woo called out to the head housekeeper, who was still standing frozen in the shadows of the dining room. "Yes, Chairman? Prepare a late supper for the mistress and me in the study, and bring the 1945 vintage from the cellar. We aren't celebrating a wedding tonight." Amara looked at him, her brow furrowing. "Then what are we celebrating?" Hyun-woo looked at the closed doors, then back at the woman who had saved him from the ruin of his own life. "We're celebrating the birth of a new empire, Amara. One that doesn't care about bloodlines or childhood promises. One that only cares about who is standing or sitting at the end of the day." Amara nodded, her expression hardening into the mask she would need for the days to come. She stepped behind the chair, her hands settling onto the grips. She didn't feel like a waitress anymore. She didn't even feel like a stranger. She felt like the architect of a world that was about to find out exactly what happened when you pushed a nobody too far. "To the study then, Chairman," she said. As they moved toward the elevator, the staff bowed. Not the hesitant, confused bows of an hour ago, but the deep, fearful bows of people who realized that the power in this house had not vanished. It had simply changed shape. It was no longer a legacy. It was a weapon. And it was in the hands of a woman who had nothing left to fear. The elevator doors closed, sealing them into the quiet sanctuary of the upper floors. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing away the traces of the wedding that never was. But inside the heart of the Park estate, the lights remained burning. There were logs to check, captains to bribe, and a kingdom to reclaim. The new mistress had arrived, and she wasn't going anywhere. The sun had not yet begun to bleed over the horizon when the master study of the Park mansion became the nerve center of a counterinsurgency. The room was a sanctuary of dark mahogany and heavy velvet, but its traditional elegance was now disrupted by the stark, clinical glow of 3 high-definition monitors and the low, frantic hum of cooled servers. Park Hyun-woo sat in his wheelchair, positioned at the center of the mahogany desk, his eyes reflecting the cascades of green and white data. Beside him, Amara Cole had shed the persona of the grieving bride-in-waiting. She had traded her silk for a charcoal gray sweater, her twists pulled back into a tight, functional knot. She looked less like a woman who had just married a billionaire and more like an analyst preparing for a surgical strike. For years, Hyun-woo had ruled through presence, through the weight of his gaze and the lethality of his reputation. But Se-rin's legal coup had been designed to strip him of that presence. She had revoked his digital certificates and locked his biometric overrides, effectively burying him alive inside his own network. To the outside world, Hyun-woo was a ghost in the machine, a man who could still see the empire he built but could no longer touch the levers of power. What Se-rin hadn't counted on was Amara. She hadn't counted on a woman who didn't need a high-level security clearance because she knew how to find the back doors that the architects had forgotten to lock. "They've been clever," Amara whispered, her fingers dancing across a secondary laptop she had brought from her own small apartment, a machine that looked battered but hummed with custom-coded efficiency. "The primary firewalls are active, and they've set up a honeypot trap on your main administrative account. If you try to log in, it will trigger an automated alert to Se-rin's legal team, claiming unauthorized access by a mentally compromised individual. It's a setup to prove you're incompetent in court." Hyun-woo's jaw tightened, the muscles ticking in his cheek. "She's trying to box me in. If I can't move the money, I can't pay the captains. If I can't pay the captains, the loyalty I've spent a decade building will evaporate by lunch. Then we don't move the money through the main accounts," Amara said, her eyes narrowing as she pulled up a sprawling schematic of the Park Syndicate's logistics network. "I've spent the last 3 hours digging into the ghost server, the one your grandfather used for the offshore construction bids. Se-rin doesn't even know it exists because it hasn't been used in 15 years. But the hardware is still wired into the basement of this house." She bypassed a sequence of prompts, her screen flickering with old-school terminal commands. Suddenly, a new set of ledgers appeared, rows of numbers that hadn't seen the light of day since the early 90s. Hyun-woo leaned forward, his heart racing. It was like watching a dead limb twitch back to life. "This is where the real war is, Hyun-woo," Amara continued, her voice dropping to a low, intense cadence. "I started cross-referencing the logistics logs from the Incheon docks with the internal payroll. Se-rin has been moving funds, large amounts, under the guise of emergency infrastructure repair. But look at the routing numbers." She highlighted a series of transactions. They weren't going to construction firms or engineering consultancies. They were being bounced through 3 shell companies in the Caymans before landing in a dormant account held by a shadow subsidiary of the Kwon-do, the rival gang that had been trying to move into Hyun-woo's territory for months. Hyun-woo's breath hitched. "She's paying them? She's paying the people who tried to kill me." "She's not just paying them," Amara said, her face illuminated by the cold light of the screen. "She's buying them. She's using your own money to fund a private army. She knows she can't hold the syndicate by legal merit alone. She needs the Kwon-do to act as her muscle when the captains realize she's a traitor. She's embezzling the Park legacy to pay for the rope that will hang you." The realization hit Hyun-woo with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just a betrayal of the heart. It was a systematic dismantling of his family's history. Se-rin wasn't just taking the throne. She was selling the kingdom to the barbarians at the gate. He looked at Amara, and for a moment, the sheer scale of the treachery threatened to overwhelm him. "How much?" he asked, his voice a jagged rasp. 60 million in the last 48 hours, Amara replied. "She's draining the liquid reserves. She's trying to empty the vaults before our spousal injunction fully propagates through the international banking systems. She's in a race against time, and right now she's winning." Amara stood up, pacing the length of the study. The shadows cast by the monitors made her look like a phantom weaver. She thinks she's being subtle by using the infrastructure accounts. She thinks no one looks at the port maintenance fees. But an empire is like a building, Hyun-woo. If the foundation is being eaten by rot, the windows start to rattle. I saw the rattle. She stopped in front of him, her hands resting on the armrests of his chair. "She's meeting them tonight, at the old shipyard in District 4. It's not on the official books, but I found a recurring GPS ping from her driver's car that terminates there every night at 2 a.m. She's delivering the final authorization codes for the shipping containers." "The containers," Hyun-woo whispered. "The weaponry shipments from the north. If those codes are delivered, the Kwandu will have enough firepower to take the mansion by force," Amara said. "They won't need the courts. They'll just walk in and finish what the accident started." Hyun-woo felt a cold, sharp clarity wash over him. The paralysis of his legs felt irrelevant. His mind was back on the battlefield. He looked at the data, then back at the woman who had seen through a web of lies that had fooled the most powerful men in Seoul. "We can't send the security team," Hyun-woo reasoned. "Kong is loyal, but his men are being watched. If Se-rin sees a Park Syndicate motorcade, she'll vanish into the shadows and pull the trigger on the liquidation early." "I know," Amara said, a dark, determined glint in her eyes. "That's why I'm going." "No," Hyun-woo snapped, his hand flying out to catch her wrist. "It's too dangerous. You're a civilian, Amara. You don't know how these meetings work. They'll kill you the moment they realize who you are." Amara didn't pull away. She leaned in, her gaze unyielding. "I'm not a civilian anymore, Hyun-woo. I'm your wife. I'm the mistress of the Park Syndicate. And more importantly, I'm a woman who spent 3 years working as a night shift translator for the dock workers in Lagos. I know exactly how these meetings work. They expect a nobody. They expect a waitress who is out of her depth. They won't be looking for the woman who has already rerouted their payment to a dead drop account in Switzerland." Hyun-woo stared at her, his heart aching with a mixture of terror and awe. He had spent his life protecting things, his territory, his name, his fiancée, but he had never been protected by anyone. "You rerouted the money?" "The moment I found the Kwandu account, I mirrored the transaction," Amara explained, a small, lethal smile playing on her lips. "The payment Se-rin thinks she's delivering tonight is currently sitting in a holding pen that requires my biometric thumbprint to release. She's going to show up to that meeting with an empty suitcase. And when the Kwandu realize she can't pay, the alliance will shatter. You're going to provoke a war between her and the gang," Hyun-woo breathed. "I'm going to make her irrelevant," Amara corrected. "I'm going to show them that she's a fraud who doesn't control the money. And then, I'm going to offer them a better deal." Hyun-woo looked at the screen, then at his wife. He realized then that he hadn't just married a shield. He had married a strategist who was far more ruthless than he had ever been. He reached up, his hand cupping her face. "If you go, you take my personal burner phone, and you take the silent tracker I keep in my watch." He began to unstrap the heavy platinum timepiece, sliding it onto her slender wrist. "If anything goes wrong, if they even look at you the wrong way, you trigger the distress signal. I'll burn that shipyard to the ground with everyone in it before I let them touch you." Amara nodded, the weight of the watch a grounding presence. "I'll be back before dawn, Hyun-woo. Keep the servers running. If I get the access key from the Kwandu leader, we can lock Se-rin out of the central mainframe forever." She leaned down and kissed his forehead, a gesture that felt less like a romantic vow and more like a pact between generals. Then, she turned and walked out of the study, her footsteps fading into the quiet of the mansion. Hyun-woo sat alone in the glow of the monitors. He looked at the data cascades, the ledgers of betrayal, and the face of the woman he had once loved now staring back at him from a security log. He felt a profound sense of loss, but it was being replaced by a terrifying new strength. He moved his chair back to the window, looking out over the sleeping city. Somewhere out there, his wife was walking into the heart of a hornet's nest. She was fighting a war he couldn't fight for himself. He looked at his hands, steady and cold. He began to type, his fingers flying across the keys. He wasn't just watching anymore. He was building the digital cage that would house the woman who had called him a cripple. As the first hint of gray began to touch the sky, Hyun-woo watched a small, nondescript car pull out of the estate's secondary service gate. It was Amara. She was heading toward the docks, toward the sharks, toward the reality that Se-rin had so arrogantly claimed as her own. "Go get them, my queen," Hyun-woo whispered into the empty room. The silence of the mansion was no longer a wait. It was a coiled spring. The Park Syndicate was no longer just a business. It was a fortress. And the woman who had started the night as a waitress was about to become the most feared strategist in the history of Seoul. Hyun-woo turned back to the screens. There was still money to track. There were still captains to watch. And there was a betrayal to finish. The night was almost over. But for Se-rin, the nightmare was just beginning. Because while she had been busy seizing the throne, she had forgotten one simple truth. The most dangerous person in the room isn't the one with the loudest voice. It's the one who is silent, watching the cracks. And Amara Cole had seen every single one of them. The golden light of the Shilla Hotel's grand ballroom was designed to make everything look expensive, even the lies whispered behind silk fans. This was the Gilded Hearts Charity Gala, the most prestigious event on the Seoul social calendar, and the first time the high society sharks would gather since the disastrous wedding of the century. Traditionally, the Park family held the center of this room. But tonight, as the doors opened, the air was thick with the scent of an impending execution. Se-rin was already there, draped in a gown of shimmering silver that made her look like a blade, surrounded by the wives of influential ministers and the heads of rival conglomerates. She was holding court, her laughter tinkling like ice in a glass, already projecting the image of the woman who had saved the Park legacy by trimming away its dead weight. When the usher announced Chairman Park Hyun-woo and his wife, Mrs. Amara Cole Park, the music didn't stop, but the conversation did. The movement of Hyun-woo's wheelchair across the floor was slow and deliberate. Beside him, Amara was a vision of defiant elegance. She wore a gown of deep, obsidian velvet that seemed to absorb the room's excess light, her skin glowing against a necklace of raw, uncut emeralds Hyun-woo had retrieved from the family vault. Stones that had belonged to his grandmother and hadn't been seen in public for 40 years. She didn't look like a waitress. She didn't even look like a stranger. She looked like an inevitability. Se-rin's smile didn't falter, but her eyes turned into chips of flint. She waited until the couple reached the center of the room, near the fountain of flowing champagne, before she made her move. She didn't want a quiet confrontation. She wanted a public dismantling. She glided forward, her silver train hissing against the floor like a serpent. "Hyun-woo," Se-rin cooed, her voice carrying just enough volume to draw the surrounding socialites into a tight, judgmental circle. "I must say, I'm surprised to see you out of your specialized wing. And you brought the catering staff with you. Is there a shortage of uniforms at the hotel? Or is this some sort of performance art?" A ripple of cruel, muffled laughter followed her words. The Minister of Finance's wife, a woman who measured human worth in zip codes, peered through her spectacles at Amara with visible disdain. "Se-rin," Hyun-woo began, his voice like the low roll of thunder before a storm. "I believe you've met my wife, though perhaps your memory is failing you, much like your sense of professional boundaries." Se-rin ignored him, stepping into Amara's personal space. "My dear," she said, her voice dropping into a patronizing stage whisper. "This is a charity gala for the most exclusive circles in the country. It isn't a soup kitchen. Guards." She snapped her fingers, and 2 hotel security officers, looking deeply uncomfortable, stepped forward. "There has been a security breach. This woman is an interloper who was recently dismissed from hotel service for theft. Please escort her out before she decides to pocket the silverware." The room went cold. To be accused of theft in this circle was social death. Hyun-woo's hand tightened on the armrest of his chair, the carbon fiber creaking under his grip, but Amara placed a gentle, calming hand on his shoulder. She didn't look at the guards. She didn't look at the whispering crowds. She looked directly into Se-rin's predatory eyes and smiled. A slow, terrifyingly patient smile. Theft is a very serious accusation, Miss Se-rin, Amara said, her voice rich and melodic, carrying a calm authority that seemed to physically push the guards back, especially in a room full of people who value transparency. But since you brought up the subject of missing assets, perhaps we should talk about the charity you've been practicing with the Park Syndicate's infrastructure funds over the last 72 hours. Se-rin's expression flickered for a fraction of a second, a tiny crack in the silver mask. I have no idea what you're babbling about. You're delusional as well as a thief. Am I? Amara asked. She reached into her small beaded clutch and pulled out a slim, gold-plated tablet. With a few taps, she didn't just show Se-rin the screen. She mirrored the display to the large digital donation tracker screens that lined the ballroom walls, the ones usually used to show the rising totals of the charity auction. Instead of dollar amounts for the gala, the screens suddenly flashed with complex, high-level bank ledgers. Thousands of eyes turned to the walls. As the new mistress of the Park estate, Amara continued, her voice projecting to the back of the hall, I took it upon myself to perform a forensic audit of the wedding expenses. I was surprised to find that while I was allegedly stealing water, someone was routing $60 million of the Park family trust through a shell company called Silver Silk Logistics. Does that name sound familiar to you, Se-rin? It's registered to your cousin's estate in Jeju. A collective gasp swept through the socialites. In this world, an affair was a scandal, but embezzlement from a partner was an unforgivable sin against the one thing they all worshipped: capital. This is a fabrication, Se-rin shrieked, her poise finally shattering. She's a hacker. She's forged these documents. Forged. Amara tilted her head, looking at the minister's wife. Mrs. Kong, you're on the board of the central bank, aren't you? You recognize the digital signature on that third line. It's the private authorization code of the Se-rin family office. It seems Miss Se-rin wasn't just planning to leave the chairman. She was planning to loot the house on her way out. She's been using the funds meant for this very charity to pay off private debts to, let's call them unrefined organizations in the shipyard district. Amara took a step forward, her presence now dwarfing Se-rin's. I may be an outsider, Miss Se-rin. I may have worked for my living instead of inheriting it. But where I come from, we have a saying, the loudest person in the room is usually the one with the emptiest pockets. You didn't reject a broken man because of his legs. You rejected him because you knew a man of his integrity would eventually catch you with your hand in his vault. The shift in the room was physical. The sharks who had been circling Hyun-woo only minutes ago now turned their predatory gaze towards Se-rin. They didn't care about the morality of the theft. They cared that she had been caught, and they cared that she had been clumsy enough to let a waitress find the trail. I think, Amara said, turning to the security guards, who were now standing at attention for her, that if anyone should be escorted out to prevent further theft, it should be the woman whose family office is currently being flagged by the National Tax Service. I've already sent the encrypted files to the authorities. It would be such a shame if the police arrived while the gala was still in session. Se-rin looked around the room, her eyes wide with a frantic, animal terror. She looked for her allies, her friends, but she found only backs turned and whispered condemnations. The minister's wife adjusted her spectacles and turned away with a huff of indignation. Se-rin was no longer the silver blade of the evening. She was a liability. Hyun-woo, tell them, Se-rin pleaded, her voice trembling. Tell them she's lying. Hyun-woo looked up at her, his expression as cold as the black diamond on Amara's finger. My wife has a very peculiar hobby, Se-rin. She likes to look at the foundations of things. She found the rot in my empire, and she's currently cutting it out. You should leave now while you still have enough dignity to walk to your car. If you're still here in 5 minutes, I'll let the police handle the reality you're so fond of. Se-rin didn't wait for the guards to touch her. She gathered her torn pride and her silver skirts and fled the ballroom, her heels clicking a desperate, frantic rhythm against the marble. The silence she left behind was quickly filled by the hum of renewed interest, but this time, the interest was focused on the woman in the obsidian dress. Amara turned back to the room, her expression softening into a mask of perfect, diplomatic grace. "I apologize for the interruption to such a noble cause," she said to the gathered socialites. "But as the Park family has always said, true charity begins with honesty. Shall we return to the auction? I believe the next item is a set of Ming Dynasty vases. My husband and I would like to open the bidding at $5 million. The room erupted in applause, not for the money, but for the show of power. As the music resumed, Hyun-woo reached up and took Amara's hand. He pulled her close to his chair, his eyes shining with a fierce, quiet pride. "You didn't just defend yourself," he whispered. "You dismantled her entire social standing in 10 minutes. You made them fear you." "I didn't make them fear me, Hyun-woo," Amara replied, leaning down to adjust his tie, her black emeralds catching the light. "I made them respect the balance sheet. In this city, that's the same thing. You used your outsider status as a weapon," he mused. "They expected you to be defensive. They didn't expect you to have the receipts. They forgot that when you're the one serving the drinks, you're the only one who sees who's actually paying for them," she said, her voice a low, steady anchor. "Seirin thought she could play with your legacy like it was a toy. I just reminded her that an empire is built on stone, not silk." For the rest of the night, Amara moved through the crowd like she had been born to it. She navigated the treacherous waters of the sharks with a strategic brilliance that left the ministers and CEOs captivated. She didn't try to fit in. She made the room adapt to her. She spoke of architecture, of international logistics, and of the modernized future of the Park Syndicate. By the time the final champagne bottle was corked, the narrative of the broken boss had been replaced by the story of the power couple who had purged their own ranks in a single evening. As they finally left the hotel, the cool night air of Seoul hitting their faces, Hyun-woo looked out at the city he once thought he had lost. The lights of the skyscrapers looked different tonight, no longer like distant stars he couldn't reach, but like jewels in a crown he was reclaiming. "They'll be calling the house tomorrow," Hyun-woo said as they were loaded into the sedan. "The banks, the captains, the rivals. They've seen that the Park name isn't just a signature anymore. It's a threat." "Let them call," Amara replied, leaning her head back against the seat and closing her eyes for a brief moment of peace. "The spousal injunction is already in the system. The embezzlement evidence is with the prosecutors. And most importantly, the room saw Seirin run." Hyun-woo reached over, his fingers interlacing with hers. The black diamond and the emerald sat side by side in the dark of the car. "I told you that you were a dangerous woman, Amara Cole. And I told you that you needed a weapon," she whispered, her eyes opening and fixing on his with an unshakable loyalty. "This was just the first shot. Seirin will be desperate now. She has no money, no social standing, and her allies in the shipyard will be looking for someone to blame for their frozen payments." "She'll come for us," Hyun-woo agreed. "Let her," Amara said, her voice turning as cold as the winter mist outside. "A cornered animal is dangerous, but a cornered architect is the one who knows where the exit is locked. We've taken her social life tonight. Tomorrow we take her freedom." The car moved through the gates of the Park estate, the guards bowing with a new, profound level of genuine respect as the mistress returned. Inside the mansion, the funeral scent of the lilies had been completely replaced by the sharp, clean scent of dark roses and rain. The first counterattack was over. The Park Empire was no longer bleeding. It was hunting. And as Amara helped Hyun-woo into the master study to prepare for the morning's calls, they both knew that the woman who had once rejected a broken man was about to learn that the most dangerous part of an empire isn't the king on the throne. It's the queen who knows how to tear the throne apart and rebuild it into a fortress. The war was only just beginning, but as the lights of the study burned late into the night, the outcome was no longer in doubt. The waitress had become the strategist, and the stranger had become the soul of the empire. And for Park Hyun-woo, the wheelchair no longer felt like a cage, felt like a cockpit. "Sleep for a few hours, Amara," he said softly, watching her pull up the morning's shipping schedules. In a moment, she replied, her eyes fixed on the data. I just found another crack in the Kwandu's payment structure. I want to see if I can make it widen before breakfast. Hyun-woo smiled, a real, dark, and satisfied smile. He wasn't just a man who had married a stranger. He was a man who had married the storm. And Se-rin was about to find out that she had nowhere left to hide from the rain. The moon was a sharp, silver sickle hanging over the Gwanak Mountains, casting long, skeletal shadows across the winding private road that led back to the Park estate. Inside the armored sedan, the cabin was silent, save for the low hum of the climate control and the rhythmic tapping of Amara's fingers against the leather upholstery. The adrenaline from the charity gala had not yet fully dissipated. It remained a low-voltage hum in her veins. Beside her, Hyun-woo sat in the shadows, his face partially illuminated by the passing flash of street lamps. He looked exhausted, yet there was a new alertness in his eyes, a look of a man who had finally stopped waiting for the end and had begun to plan for the future. The emerald necklace still sat heavy against Amara's collarbone, the raw stones absorbing the dim light. She reached up, her fingers tracing the cold facets. The socialites will be talking for weeks, she murmured, breaking the silence. But Se-rin won't spend those weeks in hiding. She's like a cornered viper. She'll strike because she has no other move left. Hyun-woo turned his head toward her, his expression unreadable. You handled the room with the precision of a surgeon, Amara. But Se-rin's world isn't just made of whispers and bank ledgers. She was raised in the shadow of my father and hers. She knows that when the law fails, blood is the only currency that remains. I've already doubled the perimeter patrol, but he didn't finish the sentence. A sudden, violent jolt rocked the car, followed by the screech of tearing metal. From the darkness of a blind curve, a heavy-duty construction truck had swerved into their lane, its steel-reinforced bumper slamming into the side of the armored sedan. The impact sent the car spinning across the slick pavement. Amara's world tilted. The screams of tires and the crunch of glass filled the cabin as the vehicle skipped over the curb, sliding toward the steep embankment that fell away into the wooded ravine below. Brace! Hyun-woo shouted, his voice a commanding roar even as he was thrown against the door. The car slammed into a thick cluster of ancient pines, the airbags deploying with a series of muffled explosions. For a heartbeat, the world went white and silent. Amara gasped, the acrid scent of chemical dust filling her lungs. Her head throbbed, and a thin trickle of warmth ran down her temple. She blinked, forcing her vision to clear. Beside her, Hyun-woo was slumped against his seat, his eyes closed, a dark bruise already blooming on his forehead. The driver was slumped over the steering wheel, unmoving. Movement caught her eye through the shattered side window. 2 black SUVs had screeched to a halt on the road above. Men in tactical gear, their faces obscured by balaclavas, were already scrambling down the embankment, suppressed submachine guns drawn. This wasn't a warning. It was a liquidation. Years of working double shifts in the toughest neighborhoods of Lagos and Seoul, navigating the predatory gaze of drunk patrons, dodging quick-handed thieves, and learning to read the air for danger before it manifested, triggered a survival instinct in Amara that no Mafia training could replicate. She didn't freeze. She didn't scream. She reached over and grabbed the heavy, carbon fiber frame of Hyun-woo's wheelchair, which was secured in the modified trunk space behind them. The impact had jammed the hydraulic lift, but the manual release was still accessible. She kicked the back door open, the metal groaning as it yielded. Hyun-woo, wake up! She hissed, shaking his shoulder. He groaned, his eyes fluttering open. He looked disoriented, his hands searching for the armrests that were no longer level. Amara, get out. Leave me. Shut up and hold on to me, she commanded. With a strength born of pure desperation, she unbuckled his heavy tactical harness and hauled him toward the open door. She was a foot shorter than him and half his weight, but she had spent her life carrying loads the world said she shouldn't be able to lift. She dragged him out of the smoking wreck just as the first cough of a suppressed weapon sent a spray of dirt into the air where they had been seconds before. She couldn't get him into the chair yet. The terrain was too jagged. She dragged him behind the thick trunk of a fallen pine, the rough bark scraping her palms. "They have thermal optics," Hyun-woo managed to say. His voice strained as he tried to pull himself up using the tree. "The car? There's a compartment under the driver's seat. A signal jammer. Amara, if you don't activate it, they'll pin us down in minutes." Amara looked at the car. It was 20 feet away, a twisted metal carcass, and the assassins were closing the distance, moving with the disciplined efficiency of professionals. One was already circling to the left, trying to flank them. She didn't hesitate. She didn't wait for a plan. She moved with the waitress-honed reflexes that had allowed her to navigate crowded dining rooms without spilling a drop, a sense of spatial awareness and timing that made her move like a shadow. She stayed low, weaving through the undergrowth. A bullet clipped a branch inches from her ear, showering her in pine needles. She slid into the mud beside the driver's door, reaching into the wreckage. Her fingers brushed the cold metal of the jammer. She clicked the toggle, and a low-frequency hum vibrated through the air. Above them, the assassins hesitated, their high-tech goggles suddenly filled with static. But she wasn't done. She saw the glint of a dropped weapon near the driver, a standard-issue syndicate pistol. She grabbed it. She had never fired a gun in her life, but she had watched the guards at the mansion for the last 3 days. She knew how to release the safety. She scrambled back toward the fallen pine, but as she reached the halfway point, the flanking assassin emerged from behind a rock. He raised his weapon, the muzzle aimed directly at Hyun-woo's chest. "No!" Amara screamed. She didn't aim like a soldier. She threw the signal jammer with the precision of a woman who had spent years tossing keys and coins to people across moving crowds. The heavy device struck the assassin squarely in the throat, his shot going wide as he buckled, gasping for air. In that heartbeat of a distraction, Amara reached Hyun-woo. She didn't use the gun to shoot. She used it to intimidate, firing a single, deafening round into the air to disorient the attackers who were still struggling with their jammed comms. "The chair!" Hyun-woo yelled. Amara lunged for the wheelchair that had been thrown from the car. She snapped the wheels into place, the precision engineering of the Park Syndicate equipment clicking with a satisfying thud. She hauled Hyun-woo into the seat, her muscles screaming in protest. "There's a service tunnel," Hyun-woo gasped, pointing toward a concrete drainage pipe hidden by overgrown ivy 50 yards down the ravine. "It leads to the estate's secondary pump house. If we get there, the biometric gates will recognize me." "Hold on." Amara gripped the handles. What followed was a frantic, bone-jarring sprint through the darkness. Amara pushed the chair over roots, through mud, and across slick stones. She used her weight to pivot the chair, her feet finding purchase on ground that should have been impassable. She could hear the assassins behind them, their heavy boots thudding against the earth, their voices shouting in frustration as their electronics remained dead. Every time a shadow moved, Amara shifted the chair, using the terrain to shield Hyun-woo. She wasn't thinking about business or contracts. She was thinking about the man who had looked at her and seen a human being when the rest of the world saw a servant. They reached the drainage pipe just as a flare lit up the sky, casting a ghoulish green light over the woods. "Go! Inside!" Hyun-woo urged. Amara shoved the chair into the narrow concrete tunnel, the sound of their breathing echoing off the damp walls. They moved in total darkness for what felt like miles, the smell of stagnant water and earth filling their senses. Amara's lungs were on fire, and her hands were raw and bleeding, but she didn't stop until they reached a heavy steel door marked with a fading Park Syndicate emblem. Hyun-woo reached up, his hand trembling as he pressed his thumb against a hidden scanner. A red light turned green, and the door hissed open. They collapsed into the sterile, brightly lit interior of the pump house. Amara slumped against the wall, her chest heaving, her velvet dress torn to ribbons and stained with the earth of the mountain. She looked at her hands. The black diamond ring was still there, caked in mud but unbroken. Hyun-woo sat in his chair, his head bowed. He was covered in soot and blood, but as he looked up at her, the expression on his face was one she had never seen before. It wasn't the look of a chairman, or a broken man, or even a business partner. It was the look of a man who had seen a miracle. "You saved me," he whispered, the words hanging in the quiet hum of the machinery. You didn't just hide. You fought. You went back for the jammer. You went back for the chair. Amara wiped the blood from her temple with the back of her hand. I told you, Hyun-woo. I'm your wife. In my village, we don't leave the lion. And I'm a waitress. I'm used to dealing with people who don't want to pay their tab. Those men were just very aggressive bill dodgers. A small, ragged laugh broke from Hyun-woo's throat. He reached out, his hand grasping hers. His grip was iron-strong, a silent vow. They were Se-rin's best men. The fact that we are breathing is a testament to you. He pulled her closer, his eyes searching hers. I've spent my life surrounded by bodyguards who are paid to die for me. I've lived with a woman who promised to love me until the end of time. But when the world actually broke, they all vanished. Except for you. You had every reason to run, Amara. You have the ring, you have the contract. You could have walked away and been a wealthy woman tomorrow. Amara knelt in front of him, her obsidian dress pooling in the grime of the pump house floor. She looked at him with a fierce, unwavering intensity. I didn't sign a contract for the money, Hyun-woo. I signed it because you were the first person in this city who didn't look through me. You gave me a kingdom to build. I don't let people destroy what I'm building. Hyun-woo reached out, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw, clearing away the dirt. The trust one had for Se-rin was built on childhood memories. It was soft. It was weak. But this. He looked around at the damp, concrete walls, then back at her. This is built on blood and stone. I don't just value you as a partner, Amara. I trust you with my life. Not because I have to, but because you've proven that you are the only person in this world who actually sees me. He took the emerald necklace, which had somehow remained around her neck through the crash and the woods, and adjusted it. Keep the emeralds. They were meant for a queen. Tonight, I realized I finally found one. The sound of sirens and heavy engines began to echo through the tunnel behind them. Captain Kong and the syndicate's response team had arrived. But for a moment, the two of them remained in their own private world. The blood on the emerald hadn't just been a mark of the attack. It was the seal on their true alliance. The contract was no longer just a piece of paper in a lawyer's office. It was a living, breathing bond forged in the dark. As the pump house doors were thrown open and Kang's men poured in, weapons hot and eyes wide at the sight of their battered leaders, Hyun-woo didn't look at them. He kept his eyes on Amara. Captain, Hyun-woo said, his voice returning to its granite-hard authority. The hunters on the ridge. I want them brought to me alive. And I want Se-rin's location pinpointed by dawn. She tried to take my life tonight. He looked at Amara, a dark, lethal promise in his eyes. Now, she's going to find out what happens when the broken man stops playing by the rules of the court and starts playing by the rules of the woman who saved him. Amara stood up, smoothing the remnants of her velvet dress. She looked at the soldiers, then at the man in the chair. She didn't feel like a waitress anymore. She felt like the soul of an empire. Let's go home, Hyun-woo, she said. We have a war to finish. As they were escorted out into the night, the mountain air felt clean and sharp. The assassination attempt had failed, but it had accomplished one thing. It had burned away the last shreds of doubt. Park Hyun-woo was no longer alone, and the woman standing behind his chair was no longer just a Zarya-type waitress. She was his ultimate weapon, and the world was about to find out exactly how much damage an ultimate weapon could do when it was fueled by loyalty and a thirst for justice. The blood had been spilled, but the empire was standing taller than ever. And as the sun began to peek over the horizon, casting a golden light over the Park estate, Se-rin was about to find out that the man she had called a cripple had just become the most dangerous man in Asia, because he finally had something worth living for. The blue-white flicker of monitors was the only light in the master study as the digital clock on the wall bled into the early hours of Monday morning. Outside, the Seoul skyline was a distant, uncaring galaxy of neon, but inside the Park mansion, the atmosphere was thick with the scent of ozone and cold coffee. Park Hyun-woo sat in his chair, his gaze fixed on a folder of medical records that had been surreptitiously retrieved from the hospital's secure server by a contact Amara had established within the night shift administrative staff. Beside him, Amara moved with a quiet, lethal efficiency, her eyes scanning lines of pharmacological data that would have meant nothing to a casual observer. But to her, they looked like the blueprint of a crime scene. The assassination attempt on the mountain road had changed the nature of their war. It was no longer a shadow play of social slights and frozen bank accounts. It had become a fight for survival. Se-rin had shown her hand, and in doing so, she had revealed her desperation. But desperation often left a trail, and Amara was a master of following the scent of blood back to its source. "Hyun-woo," Amara said, her voice a low, steady anchor in the quiet room. "Look at the vitals from the night of your accident." Not the official report Se-rin's legal team filed with the board, but the raw data from the ICU's telemetry unit. Hyun-woo leaned forward, his hands gripping the armrests. He saw the spikes in his heart rate, the fluctuations in his blood pressure, but it was the drug administration log that caught his eye. "They had me on heavy sedatives. That's standard protocol for spinal trauma." "Standard protocol, yes," Amara murmured, her finger tracing a specific entry on the screen. "But look at the dosage of midazolam. It's nearly double the recommended limit for a patient of your weight and neurological status. And look at the timestamp. It was administered at 2:14 a.m. The power of attorney was signed at 2:30 a.m. Hyun-woo felt a cold, jagged spike of realization pierce through the lingering fog of his memory. He closed his eyes, trying to reach back into that night. The smell of antiseptic, the blinding fluorescent lights, and the silhouette of Se-rin leaning over him. He remembered her voice, sweet and urgent, telling him he needed to sign just a few papers to protect the syndicate while he recovered. He remembered the pen feeling like a lead weight in his hand, and the way the world seemed to tilt and blur as he scratched his name onto the parchment. He had thought it was the trauma of the crash. "She didn't just wait for me to be weak," Hyun-woo whispered, his voice vibrating with a dark, terrifying intensity. "She ensured it. She had the nurse, who was likely on her payroll, administer a cognitive-impairing sedative minutes before she brought in the notary. She didn't just steal the empire. She drugged the king to do it." Amara stood up, her shadow stretching across the mahogany walls. In the eyes of the law, a signature obtained under medical duress, specifically when the signer is incapacitated by a sedative that impairs judgment and memory, is not just voidable. It's evidence of a felony. The midazolam is the key. It's the legal loophole that renders everything she's done since that night a nullity. She turned a second monitor around, showing a grainy, black and white security feed from the hospital's restricted medication vault. "I had Captain Kang's digital team pull the logs. The nurse who signed off on that dosage is a woman named Minji. She vanished from the hospital's payroll 2 days after you were discharged. But she didn't vanish from the city. I found a recurring deposit into her mother's account from a shell company registered to Se-rin's personal florist." Hyun-woo stared at the evidence, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with a mechanical finality. Se-rin had played a perfect game of chess, but she had forgotten that a grandmaster looks at the board from all angles. She had assumed that because Hyun-woo was broken, he would never have the strength to look back at the night his world ended. "If we present this to the Syndicate Council," Hyun-woo said, his mind already spinning with the implications, "they won't just strip her of the power of attorney. They'll have to liquidate her family's interests in the Park shipping lines to compensate for the damages. She won't just be out. She'll be destitute." "It's better than that," Amara said, her eyes flashing with a cold, strategic brilliance. "By voiding the POA on the grounds of criminal duress, every transaction she's made since the accident becomes an act of embezzlement. The payments to the Kwandu, the sell-offs to the Lee family, they all become illegal. We can claw back every one she's spent. We can dismantle the rival alliance before they even realize their contracts are worth less than the paper they're printed on." Hyun-woo looked at Amara, and for a moment, he felt a profound sense of awe. This woman, who had started as a stranger in a hotel uniform, had navigated the most complex legal and criminal web in Seoul with the grace of a seasoned operative. She hadn't just saved his life on the mountain road. She was handing him back his throne. "You found the one thing she couldn't hide," Hyun-woo said, his voice filled with a quiet, fierce respect. "The pharmacological trail. She thought she was being merciful by sedating me. She was actually providing the evidence for her own downfall. Amara walked over and knelt beside his chair, her hands resting on his. This is the moment, Hyun-woo. We don't wait for the board meeting tomorrow morning. We file the emergency petition tonight. I've already drafted the brief for Min-ho. We include the telemetry data, the pharmacy logs, and the photos of the nurse's bank statements. We move before the sun rises, and we hit her with a legal strike she can't recover from. Hyun-woo reached out, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. The obsidian dress she had worn to the gala was gone, replaced by functional clothing, but to him, she had never looked more like a queen. She'll try to fight it. She'll claim the records are forged. Let her, Amara replied, a small, lethal smile playing on her lips. The server logs have a digital fingerprint that can't be faked. And Min-ho has already secured a protective order for Nurse Min-ji. She's currently in one of our safe houses. She's ready to testify in exchange for immunity. Se-rin is a cornered animal, and the walls are closing in. The quiet of the study was interrupted by the low chime of Hyun-woo's secure phone. It was Captain Kang. Chairman, Kang's voice was crisp. Se-rin is on the move. She's just left the Kwandu headquarters. She's heading toward the central data center. She's likely trying to wipe the server history before our legal filing hits the system. Hyun-woo looked at Amara. The time for deliberation was over. The war had entered its final, most dangerous phase. She's late, Amara said, her voice turning into a whip. I've already initiated the mirror ghost protocol. Every time she tries to delete a file, it creates a permanent, unerasable backup on our private server. She's not wiping the history. She's highlighting the evidence for us. Hyun-woo gripped the armrests of his chair, the carbon fiber feeling like the hilt of a sword. Get the car ready, Kang, and get Min-ho on the line. I want the injunction served to her at the data center. I want her to see her empire vanish while she's holding the keyboard. As they moved toward the elevator, the mansion felt different. The shadows were no longer hiding enemies. They were shielding the rightful rulers. The staff bowed as they passed, their movements synchronized and respectful. The waitress was no longer a stranger to them. She was the architect of the restoration. The ride to the central data center was a blur of neon and speed. Hyun-woo sat in the back of the armored sedan, his hand locked with Amara's. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The contract that had begun in a hallway of a hotel had transformed into something far more potent. A shared soul forged in the heat of battle. When they arrived at the glass and steel monolith that housed the syndicate's digital soul, the rain had begun to fall again, a light, cleansing mist. Captain Kang's men were already in position, their black suits merging with the night. Se-rin's silver car was parked haphazardly at the entrance. Inside the data center, the air was cold and humming with the sound of thousands of cooling fans. They found Se-rin in the main terminal room, her face illuminated by the harsh blue light of the screens. She looked frantic, her fingers flying across the keys, her silver gown now a mockery of the elegance she had once projected. It won't delete, Se-rin screamed at the screen, her voice cracking in the sterile air. Why won't it delete? Because the foundations are made of stone, Se-rin. Not silk. Amara's voice rang out, echoing off the glass walls. Se-rin spun around, her eyes wide with a mixture of rage and terror. She looked at Hyun-woo in his chair, and then at Amara standing beside him. You shouldn't be here. You should be dead in a ravine. I'm a hard man to kill, Se-rin, Hyun-woo said, his voice as cold as the server racks surrounding them. And my wife is an even harder woman to fool. Amara stepped forward, holding out a thick leather folder. This is an emergency injunction from the High Court, Se-rin. It voids your power of attorney effective from the moment of the accident. The hospital records, the midazolam dosage, the nurse's testimony. It's all there. You didn't just break my husband's heart. You committed a felony against the chairman of the Park Syndicate. Se-rin looked at the folder as if it were a poisonous snake. You can't prove anything. The doctor signed off on the dosage. The doctor who is currently being questioned by the Internal Affairs Bureau? Amara asked, her voice calm and relentless. The one who admitted he took a 5,000,000 bribe to look the other way while you drugged a man in intensive care? The legal loophole you thought was your safety net has just become your noose. Se-rin collapsed into the terminal chair, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She looked at the screens, which were now flashing with the notice of her frozen accounts and the termination of her legal status. The empire she had tried to steal was systematically purging her presence, line by line, bite by bite. "I did it for us," Se-rin whispered, a final, desperate lie. "I did it to protect the empire from being liquidated." "You weren't yourself, Hyun-woo." "You did it for yourself," Hyun-woo corrected, his voice devoid of any emotion. "You saw a man you thought was weak, and you tried to devour him. But you forgot that a king is more than his legs. And you forgot that the woman standing beside him is the one who sees the things you were too arrogant to notice." Hyun-woo turned his chair toward the door. "Captain Kong, take Miss Se-rin to the secure wing of the estate. She will remain there until the prosecutors are ready for her statement. And ensure her father is informed that his daughter's reality has just become a prison cell." As Se-rin was led away, her screams echoing through the data center, Hyun-woo looked at the monitors. The digital restoration was complete. The Park Syndicate was back under his control, but it was a different organization than it had been a week ago. It was leaner, harder, and it was now led by two people who had looked into the abyss and didn't blink. Amara walked over and stood behind him, her hands settling onto his shoulders. The black emeralds around her neck caught the blue light of the servers. "It's over," she said softly. "The legal war is over," Hyun-woo agreed. "But the reclamation is just beginning. We still have the Kwandu to deal with. We still have the board to purge. We'll do it together," Amara said, her grip on his shoulders firm. "One crack at a time." Hyun-woo reached up and covered her hand with his. The legal loophole hadn't just saved his company. It had revealed the true strength of the woman he had married. She wasn't just his weapon. She was his conscience, his eyes, and his soul. As they left the data center and stepped out into the morning light, the city of Seoul looked different. The shadows were receding, and the sun was beginning to climb over the horizon, casting a golden glow over the glass towers. The contract that had started as a desperate move to save an empire had become a partnership that would redefine it. Park Hyun-woo was no longer the broken boss. He was the architect of a new era. And Amara Cole, the waitress who had offered him a glass of water, was now the woman who held the keys to the kingdom. They moved toward the car, the silence between them filled with the promise of the future. The betrayal was behind them, and the war was nearly won. But as the car pulled away, heading back toward the fortress on the hill, Hyun-woo knew that the greatest victory wasn't the return of his money or his power. It was the woman sitting beside him, the one who had seen a king where everyone else saw a ruin. And as the city woke up to the news of the syndicate's restoration, the world was about to find out that the Park Empire had never been stronger. Because this time it wasn't built on childhood promises. It was built on blood, stone, and an unshakable loyalty that no sedative could ever dull. The legal loophole was closed, and the reign of the Shadow Queen had begun. The Grand Council Chamber of the Park Syndicate was not a place of light. It was a cathedral of shadows, paneled in ancient, dark cedar and smelling of expensive tobacco and old blood. Here, the 12 captains of the various districts sat around a table carved from a single slab of black granite, their faces etched with the weariness of men who had spent their lives navigating the razor's edge of survival. This was the heart of the empire, and tonight, it was supposed to be the site of Park Hyun-woo's final descent. Se-rin had called this emergency summit, convinced that even with her power of attorney under threat, she could use the sharks of the council to tear the remains of the syndicate from Hyun-woo's hands. She stood at the head of the table, her silver gown replaced by a sharp, predatory black suit, her eyes bright with the feverish energy of a woman who knew her time was running out. "He is a ghost, gentlemen," Se-rin's voice rang out, bouncing off the vaulted ceiling. "A man who cannot lead, married to a foreigner who does not understand our customs. The park name is being dragged through the mud by this waitress. While you wait for his recovery, our rivals at the Kwandu are encroaching on the docks. I have the alliances ready. I have the signatures. All I need is your vote of no confidence to finalize the transfer of leadership. The captains murmured, their eyes darting to the empty seat at the foot of the table. They were men of cold logic. They didn't care about Se-rin's treachery, but they did care about strength. And in their eyes, a man who could not stand was a man who could not hold back the tide. Then, the heavy iron-bound doors at the back of the chamber swung open. The sound of the wheelchair's motor was a low, steady hum. A sound that had once signaled weakness, but tonight, it sounded like a ticking clock. Hyun-woo entered first, but he was not the hunched, broken figure they had seen at the wedding. He was dressed in a suit of midnight navy, his posture regal, his hands resting on the armrests like they were the hilts of twin swords. Beside him, Amara walked with the measured, lethal grace of a high priestess. She wore a gown of blood-red silk that shimmered like a warning in the dim light, the raw emeralds around her neck catching the glow of the wall sconces. The room went deathly silent. Se-rin's hand tightened on the back of the chair, her knuckles turning white. The reports of my demise have been greatly exaggerated, Hyun-woo said, his voice a low, resonant baritone that commanded the air in the room. And the loyalty of this council has apparently been priced for sale in my absence. He rolled to the foot of the table directly opposite Se-rin. Amara stood behind him, her hands settling on his shoulders, a gesture of both support and possession. Chairman, Captain Cho, the oldest and most cynical of the lot, cleared his throat. Miss Se-rin has presented us with evidence of your incapacity. She claims your marriage is a sham to bypass the trust bylaws. Miss Se-rin has presented you with a fantasy, Amara interrupted, her voice clear and cutting. She stepped forward, placing a slim, encrypted drive on the black granite table. What you are about to see is not a sham. It is a forensic autopsy of a betrayal. With a flick of her wrist, Amara activated the chamber's central projector. The wall behind Se-rin erupted into life, but it wasn't business charts or logistics maps. It was the pharmacological telemetry from the ICU. This, Amara said, pointing to the spikes in the data, is the chemical signature of midazolam, administered to the chairman at double the lethal sedative limit, 15 minutes before he was forced to sign the power of attorney. A signature obtained through chemical coercion is not a legal mandate. It is a crime. The captains leaned in, their eyes widening as the nurse's sworn testimony began to play. A video of Min-ji, terrified but clear, explaining how Se-rin had bribed her to drug the chairman. And this, Amara continued, her fingers flying across the tablet she held, is the paper trail of the 60 million won Miss Se-rin has been embezzling to pay off the Kwon Do. She wasn't just planning to lead you. She was planning to sell you to the very people who tried to kill your chairman on the mountain road 2 nights ago. She pulled up the GPS logs of Se-rin's driver and the photos of the midnight meetings at the shipyard. The evidence was overwhelming, clinical, and undeniable. It wasn't just a scandal. It was proof that Se-rin was a traitor to the very bloodline she claimed to protect. Se-rin's face went from pale to a sickly ash gray. It's a lie. She's an outsider. She manipulated the data. Hyun-woo, you can't believe this. Hyun-woo didn't blink. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a heavy, wax-sealed envelope, the spousal injunction and the High Court's ruling on the nullification of the POA. He tossed it onto the table. It slid across the polished stone and stopped directly in front of Captain Cho. The law has already spoken, Cho, Hyun-woo said. Se-rin is no longer the executor of my estate. She is a suspect in a criminal investigation. And as of 5 minutes ago, her family's shares in the shipping lines have been seized as collateral for the embezzled funds. The captains looked at Se-rin, and for the first time, she saw the sharks for what they truly were. They didn't see a leader anymore. They saw a carcass. You failed, Se-rin, Amara said, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried to every corner of the room. You thought his legs were his only strength. You thought you could walk out of a wedding and take a kingdom with you. But you forgot that a kingdom isn't made of gold or signatures. It's made of the people who are willing to bleed for it. I bled for him on that mountain. You only bled him dry. Se-rin looked around the table, her eyes frantic. Cho? Min? We had a deal. You promised me. Captain Cho stood up, his face a mask of cold indifference. We had a deal based on the assumption of your competence, Miss Se-rin. We do not make deals with people who are clumsy enough to get caught by a waitress. He turned toward Hyun-woo and bowed, a deep, traditional bow of fealty. One by one, the other 11 captains followed suit. The rustle of their suits and the sound of their chairs scraping the floor was the sound of the empire being reclaimed. Chairman, Cho said, his voice devoid of its earlier doubt. The council awaits your orders regarding the traitor. Hyun-woo looked at Se-rin, the woman he had known since childhood, the woman who had shared his secrets and his dreams, now looked like a stranger. A small, hollow thing consumed by her own greed. He felt no anger, only a profound, freezing clarity. Strip her of the name, Hyun-woo commanded. Remove her from the premises. Her family is banned from the syndicate grounds. If she is found within the city limits by sunset tomorrow, she is to be treated as a rival combatant. No! Se-rin shrieked as two of Captain Kang's men stepped from the shadows, grabbing her by the arms. Hyun-woo, you can't do this. I loved you. You loved the throne. Se-rin? Amara said, stepping into the light. You just didn't realize that the throne was already occupied. As Se-rin was dragged from the chamber, her screams echoing down the hall until they were cut off by the heavy iron doors. A profound silence settled over the room. The gala of retribution was over, but the work was just beginning. Hyun-woo turned his chair to face the captains. He didn't look like a man who was broken. He looked like a man who had been tempered in a fire they could not imagine. The Kwandu will be expecting a shipment tonight at District 4, Hyun-woo said, his voice a whip. They think Se-rin is coming with the codes. Instead, they're going to find Captain Kong and 5 of our best tactical squads. We aren't just defending our borders anymore. We are expanding them. He looked at Amara, and the pride in his eyes was blinding. My wife has already rerouted the Kwandu's payment into the syndicate's pension fund. We're going to use their own money to bury them. The captains nodded, a new, genuine respect shining in their eyes. They looked at Amara not as an outsider, but as the architect of their survival. She had done what none of them could. She had seen the rot and cut it out without hesitation. To the chairman and the mistress, Cho toasted, though there were no glasses in the room. As the captains filed out to execute their new orders, Hyun-woo and Amara remained alone in the darkened chamber. The glow of the monitors had faded, leaving them in the soft, flickering light of the candles. Hyun-woo reached out and took Amara's hand. He pulled it to his lips, kissing the knuckles that were still bruised from the mountain road. You did it, he whispered. You reclaimed the empire. We reclaimed it, she corrected him, leaning down so her forehead rested against his. I just provided the blueprints. You were the one who held the line. I was a man in a wheelchair, Amara, he said, a trace of the old vulnerability surfacing for a fleeting second. You were a king who forgot he had a queen, she replied, her eyes locked on his. The wheelchair is just a chair, Hyun-woo. The empire is in your head. And in mine. He pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her waist. The blood-red silk of her dress felt like fire against his skin. In the silence of the reclaimed heart of the Park Syndicate, the phantom pains in his legs finally vanished, replaced by the weight of a woman who had given everything to stand by him. Se-rin is gone, Hyun-woo said. The board is purged. The Kwandu are being dismantled. What happens now? Amara smiled, a real warm smile that reached her eyes for the first time since the wedding. She looked around the ancient, dark-timbered room, then back at him. Now we build the empire we actually want. One that isn't built on fear, but on the kind of loyalty we found in the dark. And maybe we finally have that wedding. A real one. No cameras, no sharks. Just us. Hyun-woo laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy that hadn't been heard in that chamber for decades. I think I'd like that, Mrs. Park. They sat together in the quiet of the high-stakes world they had conquered. The waitress had become the soul of the syndicate, and the broken man had become the most powerful figure in the city. They were an unlikely union, an architect from a distant shore and a fallen king from a mountain road. But as the moon climbed higher over Seoul, they were the only ones left standing. The war was won, the traitors were gone, and the empire was theirs. And as Hyun-woo looked at Amara, he realized that the greatest treasure he had reclaimed wasn't the shipping lines or the black granite table. It was the woman who had seen the fire in the ruins and decided to stay and help him burn the world down so they could build something better. "The sun will be up soon," Amara said, looking toward the high windows. "Let it come," Hyun-woo replied, his grip on her hand tightening. "We're ready for it." The Shadow Queen and her king remained in the heart of their fortress, two people who had started with a contract and ended with a legend. The Park Syndicate was no longer a dynasty of the past. It was a promise of the future. And for the first time in his life, Park Hyun-woo wasn't afraid of the dark. Because he was no longer alone in it. The reclamation was complete. The reign had truly begun. The silence that filled the master study was no longer the heavy, suffocating quiet of a battlefield after the final shot. It was a soft, resonant stillness, the kind that settles over a house when the doors are finally barred against the storm and the hearth is lit. Outside, the first true spring rain of Seoul was tapping against the floor-to-ceiling glass, washing away the grime of a winter defined by betrayal. Park Hyun-woo sat by the window, but he wasn't looking at the city's glowing arteries or the shipping ports he had so bloodily reclaimed. He was looking at the reflection of the woman standing by the mahogany desk, her silhouette a study in grace and weary triumph. Amara was sorting through a final stack of legal documents, the last of the divestment papers that would officially erase the Seirin family name from the syndicate's records. She had traded the blood-red silk of the council chamber for a soft, cream-colored knit sweater, her movements slow and deliberate. The raw emeralds were gone, replaced by the simple, heavy weight of the black diamond ring. To any observer, she looked like she was simply finishing a day's work. But to Hyun-woo, she looked like the only tether he had left to a reality that wasn't defined by power or pain. "It's finished," Amara said, her voice a quiet melody in the dim room. She tapped the final file shut. "The Kwandu have signed the non-aggression pact. The board has ratified your permanent chairmanship. Even the news cycles have moved on to a new scandal. You are the king of Seoul again, Hyun-woo. Entirely, and without question." Hyun-woo didn't turn his chair. "Is that all I am?" Amara paused, her hand resting on the desk. She looked at him, her dark eyes reflecting the flickering blue light of the monitors she had spent so many nights mastering. "That's what the contract required. Stability, reclamation, victory. I've delivered on every clause." Hyun-woo finally turned his chair to face her. The shadows of the room carved deep lines into his face, highlighting the strength of a man who had survived a fall from grace only to climb back up on the shoulders of a stranger. "The contract," he repeated, the words sounding foreign, almost bitter on his tongue. "The document that says I owe you $10 million and a life of luxury in exchange for 1 year of your name. The paper that says we are a convenience, a tactical alliance." "It was a good contract," Amara said, though there was a slight tremor in her voice that she couldn't quite mask. "It saved an empire. It saved a life." "It's a lie," Hyun-woo said firmly. He reached into the drawer of his desk and pulled out a heavy, cream-colored folder. It was the original agreement they had signed in Minho's dark office while the rain of the wedding night was still wet on their clothes. He opened it, the ink of their signatures, jagged and bold, staring back at him. It was a masterpiece of legal protection, a shield that had worked perfectly. Amara watched him, her breath hitching as he pulled the pages out. "What are you doing?" "Those are the original filings." Minho said this was a shield. Hyun-woo interrupted, his gaze locking onto hers. "But I don't want a shield between us anymore, Amara. I spent my life behind walls. I spent my life with a woman who loved my name but hated my scars. I thought that by putting a price on loyalty, I was finally being smart. I thought that if I called you a weapon, I wouldn't have to admit that I was terrified of being alone in this chair." With a slow, deliberate motion, Hyun-woo gripped the edges of the contract. The sound of the heavy paper tearing was loud, like the snapping of a dry branch in the woods. He tore it once, then twice, then again, until the blood and bone clause and the termination of interest paragraphs were nothing but a handful of white scraps falling onto the dark carpet like snow. Amara stood frozen, her eyes wide. Hyun-woo, the legal protections, the spousal injunction, are irrelevant, he said, his voice dropping to a low, resonant register. Because I don't want you here because of an injunction. I don't want you here because a judge in Jongno says you belong here. I realized something on that mountain road, Amara. When the car was sliding and the world was ending, I didn't think about the shipping lines. I didn't think about the money. I thought about the way you looked at me when you offered me that glass of water. He rolled his chair forward until he was inches from her, the sleek frame of the wheelchair brushing against the hem of her trousers. He reached up, his hand trembling slightly, not from the accident, but from the raw, terrifying weight of what he was about to say. He took her hand, his fingers interlacing with hers, the black diamond sparkling between them. You called yourself an architect, he whispered. You said you wanted to see how the buildings were built. Well, look at me. I'm a man who was built on stone and ego, and it all crumbled. You're the only person who saw the ruins and didn't try to pave over them. You built something new in the middle of the wreckage. Amara looked down at their joined hands, her composure finally beginning to fracture. A single tear tracked through the light dust of the study, catching the glow of the desk lamp. I was a waitress, Hyun-woo. I was a stranger you hired to be a ghost. You were never a ghost, he said, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. You were the fire. You were the only thing that felt real in a world made of silver and silk. I told the council you were my wife to protect the money. But tonight, I'm asking you to stay because I can't imagine waking up in this house and not hearing your heels on the marble. I'm asking you to stay because I don't want a weapon. I want the woman who fought for me when I couldn't even stand. Amara sank to her knees in front of his chair, her hands clutching his. She looked at the torn pieces of the contract on the floor, the remnants of the business arrangement that had governed their lives for the most intense weeks of their existence. You're a dangerous man, Park Hyun-woo, she choked out, a watery smile breaking through her tears. You're asking me to stay in a world where people try to kill us for sport. I'm asking you to be the heart of that world, he replied. I'm asking you to be the reason I fight. I have all the power in this city, Amara. I have the ports, the banks, the captains. But without you, it's just a very expensive cage. Stay with me, not for the 10 million, not for the year. Stay because you're the first person who ever made me feel like I wasn't just a chairman. Amara leaned her forehead against his knee, her shoulders shaking with the release of the tension she had carried since the night of the wedding. For so long, she had been the ultimate weapon. The silent strategist, the forensic accountant, the protector. She had built a wall of logic around her heart to survive the brutality of his world. But as Hyun-woo's hand settled gently on the back of her head, stroking her hair with a tenderness that had no place in a mafia syndicate, the wall finally collapsed. I don't want the money, Hyun-woo, she whispered into the fabric of his suit. I never did. I just wanted to be seen. I wanted someone to look at me and see a partner, an equal. I see you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I see everything you are, and I'm terrified of losing it. She looked up at him, her dark eyes searching his, finding the truth in the depths of his gaze. The mask of the chairman was gone, replaced by the vulnerability of a man who was finally, truly, in love. Then I'll stay, Amara said, her voice turning firm, a new kind of vow taking root, but not as your contract wife, and not as your weapon. If I stay as the woman who tells you when you're being too cold. I stay as the one who shares your bed and your secrets. I stay for real. Hyun-woo pulled her up, his arms wrapping around her with a strength that defied his physical limitations. He kissed her. A long, desperate kiss that tasted of rain and redemption. It wasn't the staged kiss of the charity gala or the hurried pact of the lawyer's office. It was the first kiss of a life that was finally theirs to build. In the quiet aftermath, they sat together by the window, the city lights shimmering through the rain-streaked glass. The shards of the contract remained on the floor, a discarded skin they had outgrown. The captains will be confused, Hyun-woo mused. his chin resting on the top of her head. They expect a formal renewal of the alliance. Let them be confused, Amara replied, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. They'll learn soon enough that the mistress of the Park Syndicate doesn't follow blueprints she didn't draw herself. Hyun-woo laughed, a low, warm sound that filled the room. I suppose I should warn the city. The Shadow Queen is no longer under contract. She's permanent. And the king, Amara added, looking out at the empire they had reclaimed together, is no longer broken. He's just getting started. As the sun began to rise over Seoul, casting a pale, hopeful gold over the glass towers, the mansion felt different. The funeral lilies were long gone, and the dark roses were in bloom. The sharks were at bay, and the traitors were in cages. But for Park Hyun-woo and Amara Cole, the true victory wasn't the empire at their feet. It was the fact that they could finally look at each other and see something more than a tactical advantage. They had started with a contract signed in the dark, fueled by vengeance and desperation. They had navigated the blood of the mountain and the sharks of the ballroom. But in the quiet of the master study, they had found the only thing that Se-rin's money and Hyun-woo's power could never buy. They had found a reason to stay. The Shadow Queen leaned into her king, and for the first time since the accident, Park Hyun-woo felt like he was standing on his own 2 feet. Not because his legs had healed, but because he had found the one person who made the world feel like it was worth standing for. The contract was destroyed. The war was over. And the legend of the Park Syndicate was just beginning. Not as a story of a fallen man, but as the story of a woman who saw a ruin and decided to turn it into a home. I love you, Amara, he whispered into the morning light. I know, she replied, her eyes bright with the future. Now, let's go run an empire. The elevator hummed as it took them down to the foyer, where the world was waiting. But this time, they weren't going out to fight. They were going out to live. And as the doors opened, the staff bowed lower than they ever had before. Not out of fear, but out of the realization that they were witnessing the birth of something truly unbreakable. The ultimate weapon had become the ultimate love. And in the city of Seoul, that was the most dangerous, beautiful power of all.